just spent weeks grinding, months even, and you finally have it. You finally have enough experience to go from your tier 9 to your tier 10. You grind out the credits, you purchase the tank, you throw on the equipment, you throw in the crew, and you pull it out, and for some reason, the tank feels worse than the tier 9. You, my friend, have just ground yourself a disappointment. And today, I'm counting down what I believe to be the 7 most disappointing tanks at tier 10 in World of Tanks. Basically, you've been grinding this line, and this line has maybe been decent, or maybe it's not been good at all. But you get to the end, and you think this is the cherry on top, but in actuality, it's just as bad, if not worse, than the rest of the line. And so, my first pick is going to be somewhat controversial amongst the diehards, the FV215B. This tank, I love this tank, okay? It's my 3rd favorite tank in the game, but I will tell you from experience that compared to the Conqueror, compared to the Super Conqueror, compared to the Chieftain, compared to the Carnarvon, in fact, compared to the other tier 10 heavies that have high DPM, like the E5, this tank is a disappointment. You have the same armor layout, basically, as the tier 9 Conqueror, except instead of the turret being centered, they threw it in the back. And you have the same exact gun, you have similar DPM. It's basically like, why did I decide to upgrade my tank? Why did I go from tier 9 to tier 10? I don't know. Was there a reason to? Probably not. However, you've got good, good gun handling, but you have no armor. Your lower plate, cheese. And when you get hit in the lower plate, it gets ammo racked and it gets set on fire. This tank gets set on fire on a regular, and it's really awkward to use. You've been using center-mounted and front-mounted turrets the entire time. You've got the Churchills, which are center-mounted. You've got the Carnarvon and the Conqueror, which are somewhat front-mounted, but they're closer to the center. And then suddenly, here, have a tier 10 that's rear-mounted and plays completely different than the other tanks you've been playing. Oh, you remember that gun depression you had? You don't have it anymore. It's gone. And that, my friends, is the FV215B. A glass cannon if you'll have it. In fact, the upper plate can be penned by standard rounds of the same tier. That's if you're not angling. Once you are angling, though, you can be penned by premium rounds. So there's nothing you can do. And your turret is weaker than the Conquerors, the Super Conquerors, and the Conquerors, actually. Because the Conqueror has spaced armor. This turret is worse than the tier 9. You got worse armor, worse gun depression, rear-mounted, and similar mobility. There really isn't a reason to upgrade from the Conqueror to the FV215V. Just grind yourself a Super Conqueror, just grind yourself a Chieftain, and just forego grinding this tank whatsoever. It is definitely not something I would recommend. Next is a tank that was semi-promising because the closest tank related to this was the Object 268. And that is the WZ-113GFT. This tank, the grind was not too bad. The tier 5 was good, the tier 6 was good, the tier 7 was good, the tier 8 was, well, now you're starting to feel the bigger guns and more armor, but less mobility. And then the tier 9 was really good. And then the 10 was just the tier 9. But you had to fight bigger tanks. That is the tier 10. And the 268 got its armor buffed and got its health buffed. And the only thing that made this tank, quote and unquote, better than the Object 268 was the fact that it had armor. Now that's not the case. This tank still has some armor, but it's nothing compared to the 268. The 268 has more mobility, more camouflage, better gun handling. Actually, I don't know about the gun handling. Don't quote me on that. But it's got better DPM, and it's more mobile. And like I said, it's got the better armor now. It's just a better machine, and this tank, because of that, is just a disappointment. Why would I upgrade from tier 9? Because frankly, at tier 9, you have the WZ-113, whatever the heck it's called before this one, 113FT, maybe not GFT, I don't know. But the tier 9, the other tick, had the same gun as the tier 10, which is something the 704, the tier 9 before the 268, doesn't have going for it, is it does not share the same gun that its tier 10 does. And so that was something that the Chinese had going for it. You had a fantastic Tier 9. The Tier 10 was just a severe, severe disappointment. It doesn't have very great camouflage either, which is really disappointing, especially with the tank destroyer meta going around where you want camouflage. That just isn't the case anymore. And because of that, I would never, ever recommend going past Tier 9 up this line. Stop at Tier 9, cut your losses short, and have fun. Have fun there. Don't go any higher, because guess what? You get to shoot at tigers. With this same gun, you get to shoot at tigers, ladies and gentlemen. How unbelievable is that? You're going to notice a trend in this list, and that is a lot of these tanks are rear-mounted. Now, while there's nothing inherently wrong about rear-mounted tanks, they just oftentimes are not implemented very well, because you don't get them until the end, the very last tank of your tier. It's like, oh, here, have a rear-mounted turret. This tank is an exception to that. You play through the Tiger P, you play through the VK4502A, and then you play through the VK4502B, which is rear-mounted, which then leads to this, the Panzer 7. The Panzer Kampfwagen 7, that's the full name. It looks good on paper. You have 2,500 health, you have the Jagdtiger gun, and you just got to play the VK4502B, which teaches you exactly how to play this tank, how to play slow rear-mounted heavy tanks, how to sideswipe, all that jazz. Except there is a catch. You play the VK4502B, which has very consistent weak spots, because the armor is very smooth everywhere. So you can sidescrape with it, you know you have a weak cupola, you know you have a flat turret, so you can make sure to keep that moving. This tank has inconsistent armor. Everything you just learned, throw it out the window. Everything you've ever learned in the game, throw it out the window. The armor doesn't work, but it does. It's one of those where if people just shoot you randomly, you might have games where you block a lot of damage. But also if they shoot you randomly, they might hit your 75 different weak spots, all of which lead to ammo racks and crew components. So getting penned in this tank is an absolute nightmare. You don't want to be hit in this tank. If you're penned in the lower plate, your engine's knocked out. If you get penned in your obvious side weak spots, which are always exposed whenever you decide to shoot anyone or side scrape, then you get ammo wrecked. It's a lose-lose tank, which is so sad because the VK4502B at Tier 9 was so good. Yes, the ammo rack was in the same spot, but you didn't get penned in the side while side scraping the VK4502A or VK4502B. Lastly, the biggest disappointment, other than the fact that this tank is slow, other than the fact that if they shoot you in the gun, they're going to penetrate, even with 200 millimeters of penetration. I've murdered one of these with the FV4202P, the little 83 millimeter, yeah, the Centurion 1 gun, okay? Other than the fact that that's disappointing, you get promised the Jagdtiger gun. And you're like, I get the Jagdtiger gun on a super heavy? How amazing is that? That sounds awesome. Except then you get it, and you realize that this gun pales in comparison to the Jagdtiger gun. If this tank had the same gun as the Jagdtiger, I would talk. I'd be like, okay, this tank might actually be awesome. I think if they only changed that about this tank and they gave it the Jagdtiger gun like promised, I would recommend it. Like, hey, it's big and slow, but basically you're a tank destroyer. Play like a tank destroyer with armor and a 360 turret. Like, that'd be cool. But you don't have that. So you are instead a super heavy without the armor of a super heavy. But you do. You've got you've got an upper plate. You've got a strong lower plate if you angle it and people aren't shooting premium rounds at you. But otherwise, I would avoid this tank like the plague. Too many modules get damaged in it, kind of like the FE215B, and it is a downgrade from the Tier 9, making it, to me, a severe disappointment, especially considering the E100 exists. Man, oh man, you go from all these sneaky Russian tank destroyers at Tier 6 and Tier 7 and Tier 8 and Tier 9, and they're all mobile, and they don't have great armor, but it's decent enough. And then you get to Tier 10, you have the Object 268 version 4. You've got a derpy big gun with horrible DPM, takes forever to reload, it's not accurate at all, you have all this armor that doesn't work, and you are slow. Oh, and where did your camouflage go? It's gone. But if you decided to play just like all the other tanks that you had ground through, you could instead get the Object 263, which branches off from the SU-12254, which is Tier 9. The SU-12254 branches to both the Object 268 version 4 and the Object 263. And it plays a lot like the rest of the line, the 263. In fact, it's got amazing armor. It goes almost 60 kilometers an hour. It's got a smaller gun, but higher rate of fire, high DPM, just like the rest of the line. Or you can get the 268 version 4, which is this thing, and you are slow, and you have decent armor, but you're too slow for the armor to really work. Because you have things like the E3, which just has better armor. You have the Badger, which just has better armor. Jaegeru has better armor. There's really no point to this. Look at me on flat, hard terrain. I'm going 30 kilometers an hour. This tank is supposedly able to go 40. It doesn't. Look, this is the best terrain you could be on, is pavement, and I'm going 30. That's how fast this tank goes. But just like any tank with armor, of course you're going to find your situations where you can just sit there and take hits and shoot people. But I mean, that's the same case with the Jaeger, that's the same case with the Badger, that's the same case with the E4, that's the same case with the E3. You know, even the Panzer 7 that we just talked about has its moments. But you're also going to notice that this tank is rear mounted. The gun emplacement is rear mounted, which is quite different from the rest. The 263 is also rear mounted, so you're going to get the same shot there. But at least the 263 has, believe it or not, more armor. Yes, it's open top. Yes, it has weaker side armor. Yes, it has a weaker lower plate. But the 263 has the strongest upper plate in the game, and an incredible superstructure, and no weak spot on top. This tank has a weak spot on top. Its upper plate is not thick at all. You can load heat to pen it, and its lower plate is pretty thick. It's the lower plate that you have to go through. But I mean, you're gonna see what this tank can do versus with its armor here. This guy aiming up, trying to find a shot on us, and he bounces 2 shells. So yeah, this tank can do that, sure, granted. So can all the other ones. And then, of course, like I said, you lose all your camouflage, and you lose a gun that actually flies straight. It is so derpy, and I do not recommend this tank. It is, without a doubt, a disappointment. So we've done 2 heavies, and we've done 2 tank destroyers. Let's roll into some mediums. And the first one is going to be the K91. This might be the most disappointing of them. I mean, let's just start at tier 8. The Object 416. You have incredible camouflage. The greatest camouflage on any medium tank in the game. With 320 alpha damage as well. Incredible DPM for a tier 8. Incredible penetration for a tier 8. Incredible gun. Incredible camouflage. Decent mobility. Goes 50 kilometers an hour. Super small, low profile. And they buffed it so it has some armor on the front, which is pretty cool. Okay, so basically a best-in-class medium tank, if not the best in the game, in my humblest opinion. Then you move up to tier 9, a tank that a lot of people struggle with, but I think is incredible. Better than T-54. You have the Object 430 version 2. Now you've taken the 416 from tier 8, you moved it up a tier, and you've given it more armor and a better gun. It loses some of its camouflage, but it gains DPM. And it gains really fantastic mobility. And then a superb turret. 4 degrees of gun depression can be hard to use, and a rear-mounted turret also can be hard to use. But just like the rest of this line, starting at tier 7, it's rear-mounted, which is fine. And the gun absolutely sings. It's a beautiful gun. Then you get to tier 10, and you think, okay, so we lost some camouflage at tier 9, but we gained some armor. Are we gonna lose some more camouflage and gain more armor, or vice versa? Like, what's the deal? Actually, let me tell you what you're gonna get. You're not gonna get anything. The only thing this tank has going for it is the fastest shell velocity on any medium tank in the game. In World War II. And the highest pen. That's it. You get nothing else. You have the same rear-mounted system as the others. And you lose camouflage, and you lose armor. And you don't have as much DPM than all the other Russian mediums. And on top of that, if you decide to keep the Russian medium feel, but completely go a different route, instead of getting the K91, you could get the Object 430U at tier 10, which comes after the 430 version 2. The 430 version 2 leads to 3 tanks. The Object 430, which again plays like a traditional Russian medium tank, the K91, and the Object 430U. But here's the catch about the 430U and the 430. They both have better camouflage. And the 430 has better mobility. And the 430 has better DPM. And it's not rear-mounted, and it's a 360 turret. Like what? The 430U, which has armor and a big 122 gun, has more camouflage than this tank does. I don't know why it was nerfed so hard from PC. If they didn't touch this tank, they didn't nerf it, this would be a decent tank, a decent pick. There are still other tanks I would prefer, but this tank would have something going for it. But as it stands, it doesn't. It's a disappointment. I would rather stay at tier 9. I would rather stay at tier 8. but thankfully, again, the tier 9 leads to 3 Russian mediums, 2 of which are much better, especially the Object 430. If you're gonna grind a tier 10 from the 430 version 2, I would take the 430. I know we're saying 430 a lot. There are a lot of 430s, aren't there? But that is my humblest opinion, and definitely what I would choose, and not this disappointment. I have invited the French to this list. Ignore that shot. But, yeah, I have. In the form of the AMX-30B. Oh. At tier 9, you get the AMX-30, which is the same tank. No, I mean it. It is the same tank. But better, somehow. You've got the same gun. You've got the same mobility. You've got the same camouflage. But you don't have the tumor on the top of your tank. And you don't have to compete against things like the M60 and the Leopard 1, which are both basically just better versions of you. On top of that, this tank was considered too good back in the day, and they removed its typical NATO 105 with the 268 millimeters of penetration, and then they reduced its shell velocity, and they instead gave it 250. They recently rebuffed it to 255 millimeters of penetration, which still isn't the 268. Actually, I think I'm misquoting. I believe it was 260 that it used to have. Now it's 255, so it's still nerfed, and they rebuffed the shell velocity. But what do you have going for you? You have less camouflage than the Leopard 1. You have less mobility than the Leopard 1. Less DPM. Less view range. You're bigger. Well, you've got a cupola on top, should I say. And less alpha. And less penetration. And you have heat as premium. The Leopard 1 has APCR. And you have 8 degrees in gun depression. The Leopard 1 has 9. The M60 has 9. The M60 has 420 view range. The M60 goes 60 kilometers an hour. The M60 has incredible on-the-move accuracy. The M60 has 268 millimeters of standard penetration. The M60 has 350 millimeters of heat penetration. This tank, I believe, has 315 millimeters of heat penetration. You're just shooting yourself in the foot. And again, the tier 9 isn't bad at all, because the tier 9 is the same exact gun. And you're at tier 9, it's beautiful. You can fight, again, tigers with that gun. This tank feels kind of like the Chinese tank destroyers, where it's just simply a letdown. And, which is the whole point of this video. These are disappointments. But the saddest part is the fact that I can choose other mediums on this list, which are just, or in the tech tree, should I say, which are just better than this tank. Not just the fact that the tier 9 is the same tank, and you're just going up a tier for tier 10, and you have to face bigger targets with the same gun, the same armor, the same mobility, the same characteristics. It's really, really, really sad. I mean, this gun is laser accurate on the move too, though. That's the thing. Like, if this tank feels good, but it's not an improvement. And that's the problem. That's why it's a disappointment. You're going to have fantastic games in this tank because the gun is amazing. And the mobility is still amazing. Like, this tank is, in all sense of the... It's amazing. But it's also not. It should be better than it is. There are so many other tanks, so much more meta in the game that's just better. And going from tier 9 to tier 10 feels like you're going from tier 9 to tier 9. It feels like you did not change. Disappointment. Last and most certainly least, the STB-1. I don't know how they managed to do it. This tank with its incredible DPM. Yeah, we get pinned through the turret there by this patent. Incredible DPM. They've killed. They didn't touch its DPM. The DPM's not worse. But now you have just this awkward siege mechanic that you didn't need. This tank used to have 10 degrees of gun depression. Just blatant 10 degrees of gun depression. Then they removed the 10 degrees and they gave it 6. But you have a siege mechanic which gives you up to, I believe it's 14 degrees of gun depression if you're aiming over the front. Don't quote me on that. I'm thinking it's actually 12. But that means if you're aiming over the side, you only have 6 degrees. That means if you're not using your siege mechanic, you've only got 6 degrees. And despite the fact that in 6.0, all guns seem to be a lot more accurate, this tank seems to have missed the memo. It's like, where's my accuracy? Why do I still dirk when I fire my shells in this tank? And then you have things like the Patton that got its DPM buffed, the Action X that's had its DPM buffed, a lot of the other mediums have had their DPMs buffed. This tank has just sat here. It's just forgotten. It's like, yeah, I've not been buffed. Oh, all the other tanks have turret armor buffs. Oh, that's cool. Mine's not buffed. All the other tanks are a lot more mobile these days. Cool, I've not changed. Same gun, same weakness. And the Type 61 at tier 9 is incredible. holy moly, is that tank good. The gun, the DPM, the penetration, the mobility. Oh man, the Type 61 is a dream to play. And then you get this tank, completely different, and a downgrade, it seems, almost. I mean, look at this gun bloom. Yes, I'm getting bumped here, and I'm about to just eat it there. Owie. That's cool. But it happens, right? Anyway, that has nothing to do with the tank, but it was certainly annoying, and adding to me just trying to play this tank to show it off. But frankly, this tank and the Panzer 7 are two tanks that I have sold out of frustration. The K91 is another one, and the 268 version 4 is another one. All 4 of those tanks I have sold in frustration because of how disappointing they are. And so they are definitely the ones on the top of my list if I were to make a top 4. But this one reigns supreme. I don't play this out to be ironic at all. If I want to be ironic, I will play my version 4. Okay, I'll play my Panzer 7 because I can still have some fun in those. This is just, it removes what makes medium tanks fun. You know, their flexibility, their mobility, their amazing gun. You lose all of that in this tank because your gun is derpy and you don't have quite great mobility, and it's just an awkward tank. I am not a fan. And of course, this top 7 series is always basically my opinion. But as far as disappointments go, this is probably one of the biggest ones for me. I am disappointed in this tank, and I'm not happy with it. I was so excited to get it, and when I first got it, I loved it. Unfortunately, I got it right before the changes that they implemented from PC. However, on PC, they didn't just give it siege mechanic, they also nerfed its alpha to 360, but gave it AP shells, gave it more penetration, and gave it more DPM. So they just changed the tank to be a different, completely unique vehicle. But this tank is not unique. Again, it's got the same kind of gun as the other tier 10s, the other 105s, but it just performs worse. There's nothing special except the siege mechanic, which frankly is a hindrance on the tank. Just give it back its 10 degrees, or better yet, if you really want to be fancy, give it 11 degrees. Call it a day. But it is what it is. Anyway, that is going to be it. I hope you guys all enjoyed. If you did, slap that like button, comment, and subscribe. Let me know which tanks are the most disappointing to you, or if you agree with the list, or if you would have others you would have added, or some that you were like, that's not disappointing at all. But of course, it's all opinion, and I'd love to hear from you. So anyway, take care, guys, and peace out.